What is up guys, it's Troy at the Full Setup back with another benchmark review, and for today's video we have the brand new Ryzen 5 3600 paired with the 6GB RTX 2060. For this review I will be testing 11 games at 1080p with a mix of stock versus overclock performance for you. I will also be adding some Ryzen 5 3600 versus 2600 scores and even some DXR and DLSS benchmarks into the mix too. Now as for today's test system, I'm using the R5 3600 paired with a Gigabyte B450 motherboard. As for RAM, I'm using the same 16GB Team Dark Pro from all my previous Ryzen benchmarks. This RAM is rated at 3600MHz and I was quite surprised it actually works on this B450 motherboard, but I've set the RAM to 3200MHz with CL14 full manual subtimings for today's benchmark. As for the 2060, I'm using the Asus Dual with 6GB of GDDR6. Now I did plan to add either a 2060 Super or Navi 5700 for this video, but I will discuss my reasons for not doing so at the end of this video. Now there is a link in the description to a full build guide of this system, so please make sure you go and check out that video too. Before we start with the review, I want to say a huge thanks to today's sponsor, First Player. First Player are a PC gaming accessories company that make, well, a little bit of everything. From chairs to desks to slick RGB cases, power supplies, mice and headsets, and some fantastic gaming keyboards. And as a huge thank you to everyone watching this video, First Player has given me one of their MK6 Bullet Hunters for a giveaway. The MK6 Bullet Hunter features super clicky blue removable switches, has tons of RGB including full software customization and macro support, and for your chance to win the competition, all you have to do is subscribe to my channel and pop over to my Discord server. But you can find more details on how to enter and when the competition ends in the description below, and please do take the time to have a look at some of First Player's fantastic gaming gadgets. So we're at the part of the video where I always show my stock versus overclock performance, and I know what a lot of you are going to be thinking. You're already overclocked. Overlay here is showing 4.2 GHz, and I have done no tweaking to get this 4.2 GHz. I am getting, with my Ryzen 3600, 4.2 GHz in games out of the box. Now I've gone into the BIOS, I checked everything in the BIOS to make sure there was no auto overclocking turned on. There is nothing. The Gigabyte BIOS is very basic, which is the reason I've been using Ryzen Master. Now I was getting 4.2 GHz before I'd even opened Ryzen Master, but I uninstalled it anyway just to make sure. Is there something going on? Is there some sort of trickery which is giving me 4.2 GHz? And like I said, it's just in games. As you can see here in IDA 64, when I'm at full load, I'm actually around the 4 GHz to 4.125 GHz that the Ryzen 3600's all-core turbo is. So the only thing I can put it down to is the fact that I'm keeping the CPU rather cool, and that is what's making it boost to 4.2 GHz. Now if you didn't get 4.2 GHz, if you plug yours in, if you're using a standard box cooler, I recommend you go into Ryzen Master and just enable Precision Boost Overdrive, and that should set you to 4.2 GHz. Now because I'm at 4.2 boost out of the box, I know what you're all thinking. This CPU, Silicon Lottery Troy, you won the gold mine, massive overclocks, nah. 4.3 GHz, that's all we can get out of this CPU, and that is all that most of you are going to get out of your Ryzen 3600. Anyway, over to the GPU side of things. As always, I like to keep the overclock sort of a bit low, so something you can all achieve. So I recommend you starting at 100 MHz overclock to the core. You may well be able to push up to 150. And as for the memory, because it's GDDR6, you should all be able to push 1000 MHz on the memory. So yes, we're running an overclock of 100 MHz on the core and 1000 MHz on the memory. For Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we are running at ultra settings but with TAA. Now at all stock, we have a minimum of 77 and an average of 95 for the 2600 system, and a minimum of 83 and an average of 97 for the 3600 system. Now overclocking both of the CPUs, so that's for the 2600 at 4.2 GHz and the 3600 at 4.3 GHz, but leaving the GPUs at stock, we have a minimum of 75 and an average of 95 for the 2600 system, and a minimum of 76 and an average of 95 for the 3600 system. Now when we overclock the entire system, so that's CPU plus GPU overclocks, we have a minimum of 80 and an average of 101 for the 2600 system, and a minimum of 82 and an average of 105 for the 3600 system. Moving over to Tomb Raider's ray tracing performance, and now we're just going to focus on the 3600 system for these scores. Now I'm still running at Ultra with TAA, but when you turn on DLSS it turns off TAA. So for medium DXR settings we have a minimum of 57 and an average of 80. When we're still running medium settings but we turn on DLSS we have a minimum of 62 and an average of 85 frames per second. Now cranking the DXR settings up from medium to high gives a very big performance hit here, so we have a minimum of 33 and an average of 53 frames per second. Now when we turn on DLSS there is a minimum of 38 and an average of 58 frames per second. And finally with DXR cranked all the way up to ultra settings we have a minimum of 33 and an average of 50 frames per second. Turning DLSS on and we have a minimum of 37 and an average of 55 frames per second. So there we go, DLSS, it looks blurry as hell, and on a graphics card like the 2060 doesn't really offer that much of a performance boost. And finally for the stock versus overclock performance, Far Cry New Dawn. Again I'm running at ultra settings with TAA. Now for the Ryzen 3600 at all stock with a stock CPU, stock GPU, we have a minimum of 69 and an average of 92 frames per second. Now leaving the CPU at stock settings but overclocking the graphics card, we have a minimum of 68 and an average of 96 frames per second. Overclocking the CPU but leaving the GPU at stock and we have a minimum of 69 and an average of 93 frames per second. Now overclocking the CPU and the GPU gives us a minimum of 70 and an average of 96 frames per second. Now for the rest of the benchmark we are going to focus strictly on gameplay footage, and one thing you're going to notice is that the GPU is still overclocked, and as I mentioned in all of my videos the reason for this is that I use Nvidia Shadow to record. So we know we gain about 3 or 5 FPS from overclocking, and we also know that we lose about the same from recording with Shadow, so it sort of cancels each other out, and what you're actually seeing on screen is much closer to stock performance than it is overclocked. And as you can see this system has no issues running Devil May Cry 5 at ultra settings with frame rates always way over 100 FPS and quite often over 150 FPS. Now Forza Horizon 4 is a game that is very well optimized for Ryzen compared to previous generations. So previous generations were very single core heavy, so maybe I should have actually tested those out today to see how the improvements were, because in like Motorsport 5 was it, or 6, I can't remember, but the last Motorsport game, very single core heavy and it didn't perform very well on Ryzen CPUs. As you can see here the frame rates are absolutely fantastic, we're at ultra settings and we're generally always above 100 FPS. Moving over to PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds then. Now we're playing PUBG first at the settings I like to play at, so I have everything set to low, but then I have view distance set to ultra, so I get a very high frame rate but I can see very far in front of me. These are sort of the competitive settings that I like to play at, and as you can see it's doing really well at sort of maxing out my 144Hz panel. There are a few dips under the 144 mark, but high refresh rate gamers looking to play PUBG, this system is going to be very good for you indeed. Now cranking it up to ultra settings, and for the most the frame rates will be over 100 frames per second, but you know it's PUBG, you walk into a certain room and suddenly you drop 20 FPS, and that can sort of be said the same, so you are going to see some frame rate dips down to sort of like 90 FPS, but for the most just over 100 FPS at ultra settings, so another good game. Moving on to one of the most graphically demanding games that we're testing today, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Now this system can run it at ultra high fine, I say this in a lot of my other 2060 videos, I just prefer to run it at very high settings, so I'm always sort of sat around that sort of 70-80 FPS mark. Now ultra high is fine and it runs this game very well indeed. You will see some dips under 60, but if you did want to run at ultra high settings I would probably recommend turning off like volumetric clouds, lowering shadows a bit, and then you'll have a constant 60 FPS gaming at ultra high settings. Now another thing we know about Assassin's Creed as well, it's very CPU heavy. The Ryzen 3600 at stock settings has no issues running this game. This is a game that I am seeing bottlenecks with the RTX 2060 and the i5-8400. So it's very good to see the IPC improvements, and having those extra threads really does help out with this title. And finally Apex Legends then, and a big shout out to One Shot for coming over and playing a few rounds with me earlier. As always he's carrying me through the game. Come on guys, you know me now, I literally play Battlefield, the rest of the games I'm a complete noob at. But this is another game that really varies in frame rate, like at any setting you play at. So at low settings you can see the frame rate is extremely high, you know, so high that it doesn't even matter, you know, pushing up to that 200 FPS and past it, but it can still drop down even at low settings. You will still find dips down to the 130 FPS mark, and I'm saying that like it's a bad thing. That's all very high frame rates indeed. Now, if you do crank up the settings, again, really varied. So now we're running at like ultra settings or very high, everything's sort of maxed out, except the VRAM, which was just set to 4 gigabytes of usage. And again, frame rates can be very high. You will constantly find you are in lots of areas where you're playing between 130 and 150 FPS. But when the game gets tight, you are going to see some dips down. You will see dips down between about this, I'd say 85 to 110 FPS mark as the ring gets tighter, as everyone's shooting each other, you know, throwing grenades, lots of smokes going off. The game is going to drop in FPS a bit, but either way, it doesn't matter what settings you're playing Apex Legends at. The Ryzen 3600 and the RTX 2060 absolutely smash it at this game, just like they absolutely smashed it at all the other games before it. So there was the benchmark review then, and I must say I'm absolutely loving the Ryzen 5 3600. I've thoroughly enjoyed using it this week, and it pairs very well with the RTX 2060. Now, as you can see on screen here, we have lots of Battlefield 5 footage running at DirectX 11. Now, I have uploaded DirectX 12 footage with ray tracing to a separate video, so there's a link to that in the description. It's about 20-25 minutes long, goes through loads of different maps, all the settings from low to ultra DXR as well, plus loads of DLSS. I'm just not happy with the performance of it in DirectX 12, so it's not included in this video today. Now, before I go on the super long end of the video waffle about exactly what I think of this CPU, what GPUs I think you should be pairing it with, whether you should be upgrading it, motherboard support, all the things I've liked, maybe some things that I disliked as well, I do need to talk about something else. Now, obviously, I like to use the end of the videos to tell you about maybe other things that are going on in my life. Now, one thing I would have loved to have been able to do over the next couple of weeks was test either the RTX 2060 Super, but as of making this video, it's £400, so not very interested, or the RX Vega, not Vega, the Navi, the Radeon Navi graphics cards. And part of the reason I didn't is because I did want to just test the CPU out first. I didn't want to add brand new GPU architecture into the mix as well. And also as well that I knew the Navi cards were going to be reference models, which I don't really want. But that being said, I was going to start reviewing them in about 2 to 3 weeks time, but sadly I'm probably not going to be able to. Now, I live in quite an expensive area of the UK. It's not London, but it's pretty pricey. So I rent out my spare bedroom. I've generally always had a lodger, and having all that extra income is how I sort of supplement the channel. Although we're getting some money in now, that really does massively help me out because I'm only having to pay half the bills for everything. It's a bit stressful sometimes, but you know, generally it's been okay. Bar the last housemate. He has been an absolute nightmare. It was coming up to the 5th time this year he was going to pay me the rent late, and it was because he's always changing jobs. And I haven't got a problem with someone trying to better himself, but to be honest, the guy was a bit of an idiot. It was clearly obvious he was being sacked. It was clearly obviously he was lying to me, saying he's at work when I knew he was at home. I was getting my neighbours contacted me, telling me that my surround sound has been on like pretty much all day, every day. The thing was getting ragged. I was coming in and it was like basically set to max volume. And for someone that loves audio gear, that has sort of high-end audio equipment, getting on with my neighbours is very key to me. Like, getting on with your neighbours anyway. You should respect your neighbours, and they are very nice. They know I like a little bit, you know, an hour of loud music here and there, and they're sound with that. But yeah, it was just unbearable. And when he told me he was going to be late this month, and his girlfriend was paying it for him, so basically he splits up his girlfriend, and he ain't going to be paying his rent, is he? Ain't going to be paying his rent. So I asked him to move out, and he was unbearable, absolutely unbearable for about a week. He was calling me up at work every day, making ridiculous demands. I was getting stressed at work to the point I had to take a couple of hours out of the office because I work in IT. I need to be, you know, staying positive. I have to deal with people all day, and I have to be nice to them. And I was getting a bit shitty with people, and that's not me, and that's not the person I am. So the 3rd time when he did it, I pretty much just told him to fuck off. That was it. Phone was down. Get out of it. I got home that day. Thank God I locked my bedroom door for all my YouTube gear. Now, have you seen on my YouTube kit, the rest of the house? It's nice as well. I came home and it looked like my house had been burgled. I've had to replace all of the carpets upstairs. There looked like what was Coca-Cola, maybe 2 big bottles of it, thrown all over my walls. I spent all, not last weekend when I was doing the build, the weekend before painting, when I was supposed to be prepping the build, getting ready for Ryzen, getting ready for Navi. Completely screwed it up for me, cost me a fortune. Downstairs in the lounge, all my surround sound had been knocked over. The projector had been smashed off the wall. And my router looked like it had coke poured into it, so I had no internet as well. And there's nothing worse than having to sort out all of that shit and get everything sorted out in a weekend and not having the frickin' internet. Thank God for Amazon Prime next day delivery. So yeah, big waffle there. I'm ranting about my housemate. But yeah, super stressful. And I've got no one in at the moment. Hopefully going to have someone soon. But I'm really cautious. You know, I've let someone into my house and they fucked it up. So yeah. I do apologise, that's why we're not having that stuff. Anyway, enough about the personal stuff. We need to talk about the review. Talk about some stuff here. So, seeing as we were sort of talking about graphics cards, let's start with graphics cards. So, would I sell my RTX 2060 to buy a Navi or a 2060 Super? And do I recommend that you go and buy an RTX 2060 6GB? Now, it's a very, very hard question for me to answer. The 2060... you could say at the moment would be very good value to buy because we've only got the we've only got the sort of reference Navi cards, but the Navi card has 2 gig. We'll talk about Navi in a second. So that would make it a bit difficult. I think once we get the custom Navi cards, we will see a little bit of a price change from Nvidia. And if the RTX 2060 drops to £250, I would still recommend that graphics card all day long because it offers fantastic 1080p performance, extremely good 1440p performance as well. The 6GB of RAM is fine. I would have loved to have seen it with 8GB anyway at launch. And then you have got the benefit of RTX. I think it looks very pretty, but it's not for me. But all the extra features is what I love. I keep banging on about this, but on all the RTX cards and like the 1660 and 1660 Ti, you have Nvidia's HVenc encoder. So if you are going to be recording gameplay footage, which is what I do, that's why I go Nvidia. It's very, very good picture quality now. It was good anyway, but it's extremely good. And on the new version of OBS, again, keep saying it, but it's now on par with CPU encoding. So you don't need to be going out and buying 10 or 12 core, 16 core processors, and you don't really need to have a separate rig to set yourself up for game streaming, a 6-core CPU, Nvidia RTX graphics card, and you are away with your, YouTube creation, have some fun. So yeah, I'd like to see the price dropped a little bit on it, but I wouldn't sell it. I definitely wouldn't sell it because by the time you've lost the money to sell it and the extra money you've spent, you're not really getting a huge performance uplift with the Navi card. And as for Navi as well, I think just for strictly gaming, if I can get a custom model for £300, I'd really like to test that. I think it's a very good card, but it is missing all those other features. You might not want those features, but for me, I do. So that's why I would still probably take the 2060 that performs a little bit less over the Navi. It just depends how the prices change over the next couple of months. 2060 Super, definitely not. I mean, like I'm saying, prices I'm seeing right now, £400. I've seen models going up to 450. Fuck that. Fuck that. Too expensive. Over to the CPU then. Ryzen 3600. Loving it. Loving it, loving it, loving it. You're sort of talking stock 8700K for £200. £200. That's a bargain. Now, one thing we know is that after about 6 months, AMD normally drop the prices. Now, I don't know if they will this time, but if they drop that CPU to £150, they drop this CPU to £150, there's no other words we can say. You're all thinking it, I'm thinking it. Intel are fucked. Royally fucked. How do they compete with that? The fact that they don't even put in a decent box cooler as well. So even if they made something that would probably be £200 and perform like it, you'd still probably have to go out and buy a £50 cooler, and it'd still probably gouge you for a motherboard. So Intel are fucked. This CPU is incredible, but should you upgrade to one? And again, this is a very difficult question to answer because it comes down to your use case. So if we looked on Steam right now and looked at the most popular graphics card that people are using for gaming, it would be a GTX 1060. So let's talk about that sort of area of performance. So a card that's a little bit better than it is a 1660 Ti, that's sort of around a 1070 levels performance, and a card that's incredibly well priced but a bit behind it is an RX 570. So if we take from an RX 570 to a 1660 Ti and all the graphics cards in between, that is what most people that are watching this video will be gaming on. So if you're using those GPUs, would you see a performance uplift over 2600? Not really. A couple of FPS more at lower settings, but the 2600 is still fine. Now the 1600, you probably won't see a performance uplift at ultra settings, but if you keep the CPU at stock, so that's got quite a low all-core turbos, that's 3.4 gigahertz at stock, and you play at lower settings, if you play shooting games, if you like myself, and you like to lower the FPS to get, or not lower the FPS, lower the settings to get the most FPS, then certainly you are going to see a performance uplift, so I would think about upgrading it. But again, you have to look at the price. So like, this is why I'm saying don't do a 2600 to a 3600. So you sell your 2600, you're going to get 80 to 100 pounds for it. I'd probably say 80 pounds, 120 pounds more. If you're on this level of graphics card, what are you getting for that money? You're not getting anything for that money. Okay? For gaming, you're not getting that big uplift. So where I would be looking to upgrade to this CPU would be maybe if you're on obviously an aging Intel platform, but that means an entirely new platform. And also we're talking like the Ryzen 3, so the quad cores 1200, 1300X, also the Ryzen 5s like the 1400, 1500X, 2200, 2400G. If you've got any of those processors, sell now, buy a 3600. Honestly, you'll thank me for it. You will thank me for it. This CPU is incredible for the money. Absolutely incredible. Like I said, if it goes down to £150, Intel are fucked. It's the only thing we can say. They are fucked. Next thing then, motherboards. Motherboards. Very difficult one here. I upgraded the BIOS on my motherboard beforehand, but if you haven't got a Ryzen CPU, you can't do that. Well, you can on certain select boards, so quote me, I might be a little bit wrong here, but I'm pretty sure all of MSI B450 motherboards have a BIOS flash switch on the back, so you can just put your BIOS on a USB stick, doesn't matter what your CPU is in there, and you can flash it. Now if you're new to building, you might not want to do that, but you've got a whole PC to build, so it's not really that bad to do. But what I'd recommend is, for me for example in the UK, would be to buy your motherboard from somewhere like Overclockers or Scan.uk. Now if you call either of those two up, they will upgrade your BIOS for you on an older board. And I know you may be thinking, well, I want the latest and greatest motherboards, but the X570 motherboards, as of making this video, look ridiculously expensive. Some of them look gorgeous, look absolutely beautiful, and to be fair, because Ryzen hasn't really got any overclocking headroom, probably overkill, but the base models look gash, right? Asus Prime motherboard, this is selling between about 170 and 200 pounds. Look at this motherboard. This is a basic looking motherboard. Jesus, the Gigabyte B450 is looking better than this. The lower end X570 motherboards, which is selling between 170 and 200 pounds as of writing this video, publishing it, whatever, are basic motherboards. I'm talking 120 pound X370 motherboards. I've seen 120 pound X370 motherboards to look better than this. I know one shot's like going off. He's like, my MSI board, it's better than this. It is. Do you need PCI Express 4.0? Think about it. Take a long think about it. Do you need those fast SSDs? Is a Samsung Evo at 3000 megabytes read and write on the old gen too slow for you? I don't think it is. And this Gigabyte B450 motherboard, I got it open box for £50. These motherboards, when they came out, the VRMs on them were quite slated. It wasn't a well-received motherboard. There was a lot of things picked at it. Literally, no issues. Plug in the Ryzen 3600, no tweaking, 4.2 gigahertz. Plug in my RAM. 3200 megahertz CL14. This board's only rated at 3000. 3600 megahertz CL16. Yes, fine. Both of those memory settings, full manual subtitles. Look at the VRM temps on there. Did they look hot? Nah, they ain't that hot. So, big waffle there. Serious big waffle. But right now, don't buy a Navi till we get custom models. Right now, very hard picking a GPU between 300 and 400 pounds. Right now, you do not need a PCI Express 4.0. Do you need a Ryzen 3600? Depends what GPU you've got. Do you want a Ryzen 3600? Fuck yeah you do, because this is one awesome CPU. Anyway, that's it from me today. If you like the video, leave a like. If you dislike the video, leave a dislike. And make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you enter the competition. Got any questions, come over to the Discord. We've got a real sound bunch over there. Everyone's quite nice. So yeah, end of waffle.